If a machine can draw what a person has seen, has it entered the mind, or has it only learned the shadow cast by perception on matter? Simone Weil wrote with unusual severity about attention. For her, attention was not a decorative mental act. It was a kind of consent, a disciplined emptying by which the world could enter the soul without being seized. That makes the question sharper. When a scanner records the blood flow of a visual cortex, when electrodes record electrical storms on the scalp, when an implant waits inside tissue for an ultrasonic command, what has been captured? The seeing itself, the attention, the image, or only the residue left after the living act has already passed? The crude fantasy says mind reading will look like a theft. A hidden machine will pull a picture from a skull the way a thief pulls a document from a drawer. The research says something stranger and more useful. The machine does not find a finished painting in the brain. It finds a pattern, noisy, partial, private to the person and the session. Then it asks a second machine, one trained on the public archive of images and language, which visible world that pattern most resembles. The act is not extraction. It is translation through a library the subject did not write. That difference matters. It keeps the whole field from becoming superstition with a grant number. Brain decoding is not clairvoyance. It is measurement under constraint. Functional magnetic resonance imaging gives spatially rich but slow traces of blood oxygenation. EEG gives fast but noisy electrical traces, portable in principle and maddening in practice. Tiny implants promise cleaner signals and precise stimulation, but then the body answers with scar tissue, infection risk, wires, batteries, heat, and the old engineering punishment. The smaller the device becomes, the harder it is to power, hear, and trust. So the philosophical question cannot be, can a machine read the mind? That question is too theatrical. The better question is this: what part of mental life becomes legible when the brain is treated as a signal source, and what part remains protected because it is not signal alone? Hans Blumenberg spoke of the legibility of the world, the ancient wish that reality could be read like a book. These papers move the wish inward. They ask whether perception itself has become legible enough to be indexed, reconstructed, captioned, and one day coupled to a wireless body scale interface. But legibility is not possession. A page can be read badly. A map can be accurate in one region and useless in another. A caption can say a person is holding food when the real image contains a pastry. A generated image can recover a train, a dog, a skier, a zebra, and still miss the exact thing that mattered to the observer. The power of these systems is real because their failures are specific. A fraud fails everywhere and calls the failure mystery. Engineering fails in a measurable place. The 5 works on the table form a staircase. Brain captioning turns fMRI activity into language and uses that language to guide image reconstruction. MindEye maps fMRI voxels into CLIP space, uses contrastive learning for retrieval, and uses a diffusion prior for reconstruction. DreamDiffusion attempts the harder portable path, generating images from EEG by pre-training an encoder with temporal mass signal modeling and aligning brain features with image features. NeuralDust proposes a physical layer for chronic brain-machine interfaces, tiny ultrasonic sensor nodes powered and heard through tissue. StimDust demonstrates the sibling act on the writing side, a millimeter-scale wireless stimulator powered by ultrasound and reporting back through backscatter. Together they say that the mind is not becoming transparent. It is becoming interfaced, that is colder, more limited, and more consequential. A transparent mind would be a moral nightmare in a scientific cartoon. An interface mind is an engineering frontier. It has encoders, priors, losses, bandwidth limits, acoustic windows, tissue constraints, subject-specific calibration, and consent. It has numbers that can be attacked. So the opening question returns in a more dangerous form. If privacy once depended on the practical impossibility of measuring the interior, what happens when the interior acquires ports? The science ahead does not answer that question by romance. It answers with mechanisms: ridge regression, diffusion priors, masked EEG modeling, CLIP alignment, piezoelectric motes, ultrasonic carriers, and backscatter bits. The answer will not be that machines now see the soul. The answer will be that the soul, when it looks at a giraffe, moves enough blood and current through matter that a machine can begin to guess the giraffe. The important move is to refuse two temptations at once. The first temptation is reduction. It says the mind is nothing but the measurable trace, so if the trace is decoded, the person has been exhausted. That is bad philosophy and bad science. The second temptation is mystification. It says mental life is so inward that measurement can never touch anything important. The papers reject both. They show that perception leaves structured, recoverable traces, while also showing that the recovered trace depends on task, subject, model, prior, and measurement technique. The interior is neither sealed from matter nor identical with the readout. Gilbert Simondon helps here because he thought in terms of relations and individuation rather than finished substances. A technical object for Simondon is not merely a tool sitting beside a human. It participates in a system of relations, constraints, and feedback. A brain decoder is exactly that kind of object. It is not a mirror held up to thought. It is a relation among subject, stimulus, scanner, pre-processing, learned model, latent space, and generator. The output belongs to the relation. That is why a reconstruction can be meaningful without being private truth. This also changes the moral question. If the model reconstructs an image from brain activity, the danger is not that it has found a magical door into the person. The danger is that society may treat a probabilistic reconstruction as confession, testimony, or proof. That would be a category error with legal and medical consequences. A generated image is an inference conditioned on measurement and priors. It should be handled like a scientific estimate, not like a stolen photograph from the soul. The image has evidential weight only inside the conditions that produced it. The old phrase mind reading, therefore, has to be broken open and rebuilt. Reading can mean recognition, as when a scanner pattern retrieves the matching image from a candidate pool. Reading can mean description, as when a captioning model turns brain activity into a sentence. Reading can mean generation, as when a diffusion model produces a plausible scene from a brain-derived condition. Reading can mean communication, as when an implanted mote sends back a state bit through ultrasound. These are different verbs hiding under one phrase. The science advances when the phrase is divided. Now the question becomes sharper than the popular one. Which form of reading is being claimed, and what makes that claim measurable? If the claim is retrieval, the metric asks whether the correct image is selected from distractors. If the claim is reconstruction, the metric asks about low-level and high-level similarity. If the claim is stimulation, the metric asks whether the intended current, timing, and physiological response occur. If the claim is chronic interface, the metric asks about power, tissue response, link stability, and safety. The mind is not one object, and neither is reading. So the first section should leave the listener unsettled for the right reason. Not because machines have become omniscient. They have not. Because the boundary between inner and outer was never a wall. It was a set of practical difficulties, and practical difficulties can be engineered around one at a time. The wall becomes a membrane. A membrane is more interesting than a wall because it has gates, pressures, leaks, and rules. That membrane has another property. It remembers pressure. A brain interface records the pressure of a world on a nervous system and the pressure of a nervous system on a model. Every reconstruction is therefore doubled. It shows something about the stimulus and something about the system that translated the stimulus. This is why the same output can be scientific evidence, artistic object, and ethical problem at once. It belongs to no single category until the claim around it is specified. A serious listener should become suspicious of any sentence that makes the brain sound like a hard drive. The brain is not storing the photograph in the way a server stores a file. The system is not downloading an image. It is learning correlations between measured activity and model space. That colder sentence is the doorway to real power. The dream of reading inner images is older than neuroscience because the West learned to think about memory as architecture before it learned to think about the brain as circuitry. In the classical art of memory, later reworked by medieval scholars and Renaissance magi, a speaker placed images inside an imagined building so that recall became movement through rooms. The point was not decoration. It was a theory of cognition. Thought could be strengthened by binding abstraction to image, place, and emotion. A fact left naked dies. A fact given a body survives. That old memory art is not a source of the algorithms. It is a source of the desire. Giordano Bruno, in the 16th century, built elaborate memory wheels from images, correspondences, and ordered spaces. He believed mind could be trained by arranging symbolic forms with enough intensity and structure. The modern decoder does something less mystical and more severe. It does not ask the subject to build a palace. It measures what happens when the world builds one inside the subject for half a second. A cat appears, blood oxygen changes, electrical patterns shift. The machine asks what image, among many possible images, could have left a trace like that. The theological line is just as old. Augustine, in the Confessions, treats memory as a vast interior field where images, emotions, skills, and names are stored in a way that astonishes even the one who remembers. He enters memory and finds not a cabinet, but an inward world. That inwardness matters because it marks the moral boundary. A memory is not merely data. It is a lived relation to what was seen, feared, desired, misunderstood, and loved. The brain decoder begins at the edge of that field. It does not walk freely through Augustine's interior country. It receives a narrow signal from a task, under consent, under instrumentation, with a target distribution already chosen. Then came optical machines. The camera obscura made an image appear inside a darkened room. The lens did not invent the outside world. It translated light into a manipulable surface. That analogy is useful because it blocks the wrong one. Brain decoding is not a camera pointed inward at a hidden screen. The visual cortex is not a cinema where the image sits intact, waiting for capture. The brain is active, recurrent, predictive, attention-shaped. The measured activity is not the image. It is the body's changing answer to the image. The 19th and 20th centuries gave the dream instruments. Hermann von Helmholtz treated perception as inference, a nervous system making unconscious judgments from incomplete data. Hans Berger recorded human EEG in the early 20th century, turning scalp voltage into a clinical and scientific object. Functional magnetic resonance imaging emerged in the late 20th century after the discovery that blood oxygenation could serve as a proxy for neural activity. Seiji Ogawa's work on the blood oxygen level dependent signal helped make that proxy central. These tools did not make thought visible. They made some effects of neural activity recordable. Now the lineage bends again because the decoding target has changed. Older systems tried to map brain activity to hand-built features or to the latent space of older generative models. The new systems lean on foundation models. CLIP supplies a joint image language geometry. Stable diffusion and versatile diffusion supply generative machinery trained far beyond the brain data set itself. GIT supplies image captioning. ControlNet supplies a way to guide generation with structures such as depth. The brain data is small, the public model is enormous, and the bridge between them is trained with ruthless care. That bridge is the modern memory wheel. In Bruno's wheel, a symbol's power came from its position in a constructed system of correspondences. In MindEye, a brain pattern is pushed toward a position in CLIP space. In brain captioning, a brain pattern is translated into features that a captioning decoder can turn into a sentence. In DreamDiffusion, an EEG encoder is trained to understand temporal structure before its outputs are aligned with image embeddings. The occult dream of correspondences has been replaced by vector geometry, but the form of the question remains recognizable. Which inner trace corresponds to which outer image? The hardware lineage matters too. The first brain-machine interfaces were not dreams of art. They were clinical and experimental systems trying to record, stimulate, and communicate with nervous tissue. The old obstacle was not imagination. It was packaging. Wires pierce skin. Electrodes provoke tissue. Batteries occupy volume. Radio frequency power transfer weakens as implants shrink and tissue absorbs energy. Neural dust and StimDust enter this lineage by treating ultrasound as a carrier for power and communication inside tissue. That is not a metaphor. Sound waves, because their wavelengths in tissue are short and attenuation can be lower at relevant scales, can couple to small piezoelectric structures in a way electromagnetic links struggle to match. The deep history therefore has two streams. One stream is symbolic: memory palaces, inner images, the desire to make thought legible. The other is material: electrodes, scanners, piezoelectric crystals, low-power CMOS, acoustic links. The new field begins when those streams meet. The image in the mind becomes a target for a generative model. The implant in tissue becomes a node in an ultrasonic network. The philosophical fantasy becomes a stack. That is why the old traditions belong here only if kept disciplined. They do not explain the data. They explain the hunger that made the data feel like destiny. Science does the harder work. It asks how many subjects, how many trials, what accuracy, what baseline, what depth, what power, what bit error rate, what failure mode. The lineage begins with the wish to see inward. The field becomes serious only when the wish is forced to answer in units. There is another ancestor here, the physiognomic error. For centuries, people tried to infer character from face, skull, gesture, or outward sign. Much of that history is scientifically bankrupt and morally ugly. It matters because modern brain decoding must not become a more expensive version of the same mistake. The current work is strongest when it refuses to infer the whole person from a signal. It decodes a constrained relation between stimulus and response. It does not read virtue. It does not read guilt. It does not read destiny. That restraint is part of its lineage too, a correction to older fantasies of total inward access. The alchemical tradition offers a disciplined warning if treated as history of thought rather than belief. Alchemy wanted transformation, but it also knew that transformation required vessels. The vessel mattered. Heat mattered. Sequence mattered. Impurity mattered. The modern version is not sulfur and mercury. It is scanner field strength, electrode placement, filtering, token masking, regularization, diffusion steps, acoustic intensity, and encapsulation. A signal does not become knowledge in the air. It becomes knowledge inside a vessel of constraints. The cathedral builders belong for a similar reason. A cathedral is not only stone lifted high, it is load routed through arches, buttresses, ribs, and foundations so that light can enter without collapse. Brain decoding has its own flying buttresses. Pre-trained models carry load the brain dataset cannot carry. CLIP carries the relation between image and language. Diffusion carries image synthesis. Ridge regression, contrastive learning, mass modeling, and diffusion priors route the pressure. When the public sees the final image, it sees the stained glass. The builder must know the load path. The lineage also runs through media history. Photography did not abolish painting. It changed what counted as evidence and what counted as art. Cinema did not abolish memory. It changed the public imagination of time, motion, and testimony. Brain reconstruction will not abolish inwardness. It will change what kinds of neural events can be displayed, disputed, stored, and misused. That is why the field needs historians as much as engineers. A new instrument always brings a new etiquette of belief. By the time fMRI and EEG meet diffusion models, the ancient dream has been disciplined by 3 centuries of instruments. The image is no longer a symbol placed in a memory palace. It is a stimulus in a dataset. The inner trace is no longer a metaphor in theology. It is a voxel pattern or a voltage sequence. The act of return is no longer ritual. It is a learned mapping into latent space. Yet the question that drives the work remains almost medieval in its intensity. Can the unseen form inside a person be made visible without betraying what makes it inner? There is a final lineage, the lineage of names. A field becomes dangerous when its name arrives before its precision. Mind reading is one of those names. It carries theater, fear, surveillance, confession, and miracle. The older arts had the same problem. Divination, memory, illumination, inspiration, each word gathered too many hopes. The scientific task is partly linguistic. Rename the act until the name no longer lies. Stimulus decoding, neural representation mapping, latent alignment, ultrasonic power transfer, backscatter confirmation. These names have less glamour. They also have handles a reviewer can grip. Picture the scene without the myth. A subject lies inside a scanner, still because motion is poison to the measurement. Images flash: a giraffe, a train, a plate of food, a skier, a bus, a clock tower. The brain does what it has always done. It sees. The machine does what it can. It records blood oxygen changes across visual regions, later compressed into voxel patterns. Outside the scanner, a model attempts the translation. Sometimes it returns the right animal in wrong posture. Sometimes the right vehicle in wrong street. Sometimes the caption gets the broad scene but loses the object that would have mattered to a human witness. That is the problem in plain terms. The signal is real, but it is not enough by itself. fMRI is rich in space and poor in time. It measures a vascular answer that lags behind neural firing. EEG is rich in time and poor in spatial specificity. It is low cost and portable compared with fMRI, but it is noisy, mixed by the skull and scalp, and sharply affected by individual differences. Implanted systems can be cleaner and can stimulate as well as record, yet they enter the body, where every millimeter of device, every wire, every heat source, and every immune response becomes part of the scientific claim. The cost is not abstract. If a locked-in patient could communicate rich visual choices through a brain interface, an error is not a funny hallucination. It is a failed sentence. If a clinical device stimulates a nerve, imprecision is not a cosmetic flaw. It can mean the wrong fibers recruited, the wrong dose of charge, the wrong safety margin. If an artist tries to externalize a dream from EEG, fuzziness may be acceptable. If a physician tries to infer cognitive state, fuzziness becomes liability. The same decoder can be playful in one room and ethically loaded in another. The present bottleneck is therefore not whether the machine can make an image. Diffusion models can make images. The bottleneck is whether the conditioning signal from the brain is faithful enough and whether the map from brain to model space remains valid outside the narrow conditions that trained it. Subject-specific models dominate because brains are not interchangeable circuit boards. Even when the stimulus set is shared, anatomy, attention, scanner session, pre-processing, and mental strategy can reshape the signal. A person can resist non-invasive decoding by moving, losing attention, or thinking about something unrelated. Compliance is not a footnote. It is part of the measurement apparatus. For EEG, the problem sharpens. DreamDiffusion chooses EEG because it points toward portability and low cost. That choice creates the central pain. EEG is non-invasive, but the signal is noisy and limited. The paper names individual differences as a major challenge. It also names the alignment problem. Stable Diffusion already knows how to use text and image embeddings because CLIP aligned those worlds through large-scale training, but EEG is a different space. A brain voltage trace does not arrive speaking the language of a text prompt. For fMRI image reconstruction, the problem is almost inverted. The signal can be strong enough when collected under demanding conditions, but the setting is impractical for ordinary use. MindEye's privacy discussion makes the constraint plain. The natural scenes dataset participants spent up to 40 hours in the magnetic resonance imaging machine to gather enough training data. That is not a consumer path. It is a laboratory path, and a powerful one. The question is whether the representation learned there can teach the field how to build models that transfer across subjects, modalities, and contexts. For implants, the problem becomes physical survival. Neural dust begins from a hard observation. Chronic brain-machine interfaces need many recording sites over long periods, but current systems face practical ceilings in channel count, wiring, tissue response, and infection risk. The paper's proposed answer is radical because it treats the recording interface as a swarm of tiny free-floating nodes powered and read ultrasonically. Yet the smaller a node becomes, the less electrode separation it has, the weaker the differential neural signal, and the more power the front end needs to maintain signal to noise. Miniaturization is not free. It sends the bill to physics. StimDust attacks the stimulation side. Clinical stimulators are often far larger than the target nerves or tissues they affect. Batteries, leads, anatomical pockets, and lead failure constrain where stimulation can go. A millimeter scale, batteryless, leadless stimulator placed at the target changes the surgical and therapeutic imagination. But then the device must harvest enough power, decode commands, deliver controlled current, clear charge safely, report its state, tolerate acoustic misalignment, and operate within ultrasound safety limits. The phrase wireless implant hides a brutal list of obligations, so the stakes are not only scientific, they are architectural. Brain decoding needs a bridge from biological signal to machine representation. Brain interfacing needs a physical layer that can live with tissue. The uploaded papers form two halves of one problem. The first half asks how the world seen by a person can be reconstructed from neural activity. The second half asks how future interfaces could be made small, wireless, and chronic enough to move beyond the scanner room. The cost of failure is a field trapped between impressive demonstrations and unusable systems. A program director hears all of this and asks the correct ugly question: what breaks first? The answer depends on the claim. If the claim is mind reading, everything breaks. If the claim is stimulus reconstruction under consent and calibration, the evidence becomes credible. If the claim is portable EEG art generation, noise and subject specificity break first. If the claim is clinical closed-loop stimulation, safety margins, charge control, and link robustness break first. A serious lecture must not smooth those differences. It must sharpen them. There is also an industrial problem hiding behind the scientific one. Foundation models keep improving, but neural data remains expensive, slow, and person-specific. A diffusion model can be trained on huge public corpora. A brain decoder cannot ask one subject for billions of scans. The sample imbalance is extreme. That is why the bridge matters so much. Every paper here tries to get more value from scarce neural data by leaning on a model trained elsewhere or by pre-training on broader unpaired neural data. The scarce object is not the image model. The scarce object is the calibrated brain signal. This scarcity shapes the ethics. If 40 hours of scanner time are needed for a high-quality subject-specific model, then the data set is not merely technical. It is a record of a person's neural responses over time. If EEG data across hundreds of people is used to pre-train an encoder, then questions of consent, data governance, and reuse follow. If implants record or stimulate chronically, then safety and autonomy become part of the system requirements. A brain interface is never only a software pipeline. It is a social contract with hardware attached. The vivid scene extends beyond the scanner. Imagine a rat sciatic nerve under anesthesia, a tiny mote cuffed at the nerve, the skin and muscle closed above it, and an external ultrasonic transceiver touching the body through gel. A pulse travels through tissue as sound. The mote harvests power, decodes the timing, sends current into the nerve, and changes its reflected echo so the external device knows stimulation occurred. Downstream muscle answers. The system is small enough to make old stimulators look like architecture imposed on anatomy rather than devices built for anatomy, but the proof lasts only as long as the experiment and only in the tissue context tested. That contrast is the whole field in miniature. The scanner side is rich in representation and poor in portability. The mote side is rich in physical plausibility and narrow in function. One side can infer visual content from brain activity under controlled conditions. The other can deliver controlled stimulation through tissue. A serious future system has to earn both. It must know what state it is reading, know what action it is taking, and know whether the body received the action. That is closed loop not as slogan, but as accountability. The problem then is reliability across layers. Biological reliability. Does the neural signal mean the same thing across days, subjects, states, and tasks? Representational reliability. Does the latent space preserve what the application needs, whether category, instance, caption, geometry, or effective tone? Generative reliability. Does the image generator obey the brain-derived condition or impose its own priors too aggressively? Physical reliability. Does the wireless link deliver power and data safely under misalignment and tissue variation? Clinical reliability. Does the system help without creating a new dependency or risk?
The ordinary listener may hear mind reading and imagine privacy first. The applicant must hear 5 reliability questions before privacy even starts. Privacy is real, but reliability decides whether the technology can do anything in the first place. The same humility protects both science and ethics. If the system is probabilistic, conditioned, calibrated, and failure-prone, then it must be described that way. Precision is not only an engineering virtue, it is a moral one.
The easiest way to misunderstand these systems is to imagine a picture hidden inside the head. There is no finished picture waiting there. There is activity. Some of it is local, some distributed, some driven by the stimulus, some by attention, some by the subject's history, some by noise. The decoder begins with that activity and asks a practical question. Which point in a learned representational world should this activity point toward? Think of the scene in Arrival, where language is not a label pasted on experience after the fact. It becomes a structure that changes what can be perceived and expressed. The brain decoders in these papers do not merely output pictures. They borrow the language of models that already know how images and words hang together. CLIP is one such language. Stable diffusion and versatile diffusion are engines that can turn a position in that language into a visible image. GIT is a model that can turn visual features into captions. The brain signal is forced to learn a way into those languages. Brain captioning does this with a clean modular story. First, take fMRI activity from people viewing natural images. Then train linear maps from that brain activity to features used by a captioning model. The captioning model, GIT, has already learned from image and text data how to describe a scene. During inference, the real image is gone. Only the brain activity remains. The system estimates the features that the image would have produced, feeds them to the decoder, and a sentence appears. That sentence becomes a semantic anchor for image generation. But a caption alone is too airy. It can say a giraffe is standing near a tree, yet it may not know where the tree stands or how the foreground separates from the background. So brain captioning also estimates an initial image and a depth map. The initial image gives colors and approximate shapes through a VDVAE pathway. The depth estimate gives spatial structure through a control net guided diffusion process. Text supplies meaning. The initial guess supplies low-level appearance. Depth supplies relation. Stable diffusion uses them together to generate a plausible reconstruction. MindEye tells the same story with a more aggressive representational bet. It maps fMRI voxels into the image embedding space of CLIP. Then it separates 2 tasks that can fight each other. Retrieval asks, can the model find the exact image that caused this brain activity? Reconstruction asks, can the model generate a visible image that preserves semantic and perceptual similarity? MindEye uses a contrastive path for retrieval and a diffusion prior for reconstruction, because one embedding that tries to satisfy both jobs can become compromised. The contrastive path is like a fingerprint system. Given a brain sample, the model produces an embedding. Given many candidate images, CLIP produces image embeddings. The closest match should be the scene image. That is retrieval. The reconstruction path is more like translation between dialects. Contrastive learning can align directions but leave a modality gap. The diffusion prior learns how to turn the brain-derived embedding into something a pre-trained image generator can use as if it were an image embedding. Then a generative model produces the visible reconstruction. DreamDiffusion moves from fMRI to EEG, and that changes the story. EEG is less like a detailed city map and more like hearing a storm through walls. The trick is to make the EEG encoder learn temporal structure before asking it to generate images. The model masks parts of the EEG signal over time and trains the encoder to reconstruct what was hidden from the surrounding context. That pre-training teaches the encoder regularities in brain signals across subjects and tasks. Only after that does the system fine-tune with paired EEG and image data. Then DreamDiffusion attaches the EEG representation to stable diffusion through cross-attention. In plain language, the image generator is no longer conditioned by text alone. It is conditioned by a projected representation of the EEG signal. The paper adds CLIP image supervision so the EEG embeddings are pulled toward the image embedding space. This is the central move. The brain signal is not asked to become a picture directly. It is asked to become a condition that the image generator can understand. Neural dust and StimDust tell a story beneath the story. Suppose the decoders improve. Suppose the next question is not how to reconstruct images in the scanner, but how to build brain interfaces that can live in the body. Electromagnetic links struggle at tiny implant scales inside tissue because antennas and coils shrink badly, tissue absorption rises, and power transfer collapses. Ultrasound offers another route. A piezoelectric mote can convert acoustic energy into electrical energy, and it can modulate its acoustic reflection to send information back. The body becomes a medium for sound-based power and communication. StimDust takes that idea from system concept into a working stimulator. An external transceiver sends an ultrasonic waveform through tissue. A piezoceramic element on the mote harvests energy. A custom integrated circuit decodes timing information from the ultrasound envelope, sets stimulation parameters, delivers current-controlled pulses through electrodes, and changes the load on the piezo during stimulation so that the external transceiver sees a backscattered state bit. The command, the power, and the safety indication share one acoustic link. That is the mechanism story. Brain activity is translated into latent space. Latent space is translated into images or captions. Ultrasound is translated into power and commands. Backscatter is translated into state. None of the systems relies on magic. Each system survives by refusing a direct path and building an intermediate language. The brain does not speak image. The model learns a bridge. The implant does not carry a battery. The acoustic field carries energy. The mote does not shout through tissue. It changes its reflection. The result is less like a mind being open and more like a customs checkpoint between kingdoms. Neural activity arrives speaking one language. CLIP speaks another. Diffusion models speak another. Tissue speaks acoustics. Electronics speak charge, voltage, timing, and current. The work is the translation protocol. The failure of generic commentary is that it calls this mind reading and stops. The real thing is more interesting because it is more exact. The Matrix gives a useful negative example. In that film, perception is a total simulation piped into the nervous system, a seamless artificial world mistaken for reality. These papers are almost the reverse. They do not pipe a world into a person. They try to infer, from the body's response, which world was presented. The machine is not the architect of the subject's experience in the decoding papers. It is a historian arriving after the event, reading traces at the scene. The detective metaphor works only if kept mechanical. A detective with one footprint and a partial fingerprint does not reconstruct the criminal by imagination alone. The detective uses a database, prior probabilities, known patterns, and the constraints of the scene. That is what CLIP and diffusion models supply. The brain activity is the trace. The candidate image space is the database. The generator supplies plausible completions. The evaluation asks whether the completion respects the trace or merely tells a beautiful lie. For EEG, the story is almost musical. A producer hears a damaged sample under noise and tries to identify the original track. Timing matters. Rhythm matters. The sound is degraded, but structure remains. DreamDiffusion's temporal masking forces the encoder to learn rhythms in the neural signal by hiding pieces and predicting them from context. Only later does the system ask that learned ear to guide an image generator. The encoder becomes less gullible because it has first learned the grammar of noisy EEG. For ultrasound implants, the story becomes echo and reply. A bat does not need a wire to know where the world is. It sends sound and reads the returning pattern. Neural dust and StimDust use a more engineered cousin of that idea. The external device sends ultrasound. The piezoelectric mote converts part of that mechanical energy into electrical energy, and the mote changes its acoustic reflection to communicate. It is not loud communication. It is a controlled change in echo. The common structure across all these stories is addressability. CLIP space gives images and captions addresses in a semantic geometry. VDVAE and stable diffusion latent spaces give appearance addresses. Ultrasound gives small devices an address through tissue. Backscatter gives the mote a way to say, I change state, without carrying a radio in the old sense. The future interface is a system of addresses: neural, semantic, perceptual, acoustic, electrical. That is why the story must stay precise. When someone says the machine drew a thought, ask which address was used: fMRI to CLIP, fMRI to GIT, EEG to stable diffusion through cross-attention, ultrasound to a piezoelectric mote, backscatter to an external receiver. The romance collapses into engineering verbs and the field becomes stronger. The deep mechanism begins with the representational wager. These systems do not train a giant image generator from brain data alone. They cannot. The number of brain samples is tiny compared with the number of image-text pairs used to train modern vision, language, and diffusion systems. So the brain model learns a controlled entry into an already trained representational economy. That economy has two especially important regions. One is semantic, where concepts like dog, bus, skier, giraffe, food, and clock tower live near language. The other is perceptual, where color, texture, spatial layout, and rough geometry live closer to the image surface. MindEye makes that split explicit. Its high-level pathway maps fMRI voxels into the final hidden layer space of CLIP vision transformer large 14. The model uses a residual multi-layer perceptron backbone and task-specific submodules. One submodule is trained for retrieval through contrastive learning. It produces brain embeddings that have high cosine similarity to the matching image embeddings. Another submodule is a diffusion prior trained to convert brain-derived embeddings into aligned CLIP image embeddings that a generative model can use. The paper calls the retrieval embeddings disjointed because they can match direction while still differing in the way a generator expects. The prior repairs that mismatch. The reason is subtle. Contrastive learning rewards the model for putting paired brain and image samples closer than unpaired samples. That is excellent for retrieval. It does not guarantee that the resulting brain vector lies in the exact distribution a generative decoder expects from image embeddings. The modality gap is not a cosmetic issue. If the generator expects one dialect and the brain model speaks a cousin dialect, reconstruction can suffer even when retrieval works. MindEye's diffusion prior learns the conditional distribution of image embeddings given brain embeddings. In spoken algebra, it learns the image embedding that should exist, conditioned on the brain embedding that was measured. MindEye's low-level pathway addresses a different weakness. CLIP is powerful because it is semantic. That strength can become a weakness when the task requires exact color, texture, or spatial position. Captions rarely preserve every low-level detail, and CLIP inherits that bias. So MindEye also maps voxels into the latent space of the variational autoencoder used by stable diffusion. The resulting blurry reconstruction lacks crisp high-level content, but preserves low-level structure. Then the final generation can start from that low-level image through an image-to-image procedure, rather than pure noise. One path says what the image is. The other path says how it roughly looks. Brain captioning performs a related split, but with a different center of gravity. Its first contribution is to predict captions rather than images. This matters because language is flexible. Once a caption is predicted, it can condition any future image generator without retraining the brain model from scratch. The pipeline uses GIT, the generative image-to-text transformer, as the captioning backbone. During training, image features are extracted and regularized. Linear regression maps fMRI activity to those features. During inference, the estimated features are normalized to match the distribution of true image features, then passed to the decoder for a caption. The image reconstruction part of brain captioning adds two conditioning streams. For the initial guess, it uses VDVAE, latent representations from the first 31 layers, learned through separate regularized regressions from brain activity. For depth, it computes depth images from the training stimuli, encodes those depth images into VDVAE latents, and trains another regression from brain activity to those depth latents. Stable Diffusion version 2 plus ControlNet then uses the predicted caption, the initial guess, and the depth estimate. The important point is that the model does not pretend language alone can carry geometry.
It gives the generator a semantic rope, a color and shape rope, and a depth rope. DreamDiffusion is technically different because its input is EEG. The EEG signal is a two-dimensional recording, channels by time. It has high temporal resolution and low spatial resolution. It is variable across people, cognitive states, sleep, age, equipment, and context. The paper's first move is temporal mass signal modeling. The signal is divided into tokens along the time domain. A portion is masked. A one-dimensional convolution turns tokens into embeddings. An asymmetric encoder-decoder architecture predicts the missing signal tokens from context. The decoder is discarded after pre-training. The encoder remains as the learned representation engine. That detail is not optional. Without pre-training, the system tries to learn semantics from limited paired EEG image data, and the ablation results show that the performance collapses. Pre-training forces the encoder to learn general EEG structure from a much larger collection before the image task begins. The mask ratio matters as well. Too little masking makes the task shallow. Too much masking destroys needed context. The reported best mask ratio is high, 75%. That choice mirrors masked auto-encoding and vision more than ordinary low-mass language modeling, because the signal has redundancy and noise that make a high missing fraction useful. After pre-training, DreamDiffusion fine-tunes with a pre-trained stable diffusion model. The EEG encoder output is projected into an embedding, and that embedding enters the U-net through cross-attention. Spoken plainly, the generator's internal denoising process attends to the brain-derived condition the way a text condition generator would attend to a prompt. The paper keeps most of stable diffusion fixed and optimizes the EEG encoder and cross-attention heads. The loss asks the U-net to predict the noise added during diffusion, conditioned on the EEG representation. Then comes the CLIP alignment. Stable diffusion already works well with text because CLIP has aligned image and text representations. EEG is foreign to that space. DreamDiffusion passes the paired image through the fixed CLIP image encoder, projects the EEG features into the same dimension, and minimizes the cosine distance between the EEG embedding and the image embedding. In spoken math, the loss is 1 minus the cosine similarity of the image embedding and the projected EEG embedding. This pulls the brain representation toward the visual semantic space the generator already understands. Neural dust mechanism is the physical complement. The system proposes thousands of free-floating sensor nodes at the scale of tens to hundreds of micrometers, plus a subcranial interrogator. Each dust node includes electrodes, a piezoelectric transducer, and an active version's low-power CMOS circuitry. The interrogator sends ultrasound. The node harvests power or modulates reflection. The node reports local extracellular electrophysiology through changes in amplitude, phase, or frequency of the backscattered ultrasonic wave. The reason ultrasound wins in the scaling argument is that acoustic velocity is far lower than light speed, so a useful acoustic wavelength in tissue can be far shorter than the electromagnetic wavelength at a comparable implant scale. That sentence needs the plain version. A tiny implant cannot carry a good radio antenna. The antenna becomes too small compared with the wave, tissue eats power, and the link budget dies. A tiny piezo can couple to ultrasound because the sound wave in tissue is much shorter. The node can be small and still acoustically visible. That is the structural insight. It does not erase hard limits. It moves the bottleneck from impossible radio scaling toward acoustic link design, piezoelectric materials, front-end noise, electrode spacing, and tissue safety. StimDust implements this logic for stimulation. The moat contains a piezo-ceramic transducer, a storage capacitor, and a custom stimulation integrated circuit. The external transceiver uses a carrier near 1.85 MHz. The downlink encodes stimulation parameters in the timing of ultrasound on and off intervals. The chip does not need a continuously running high-power clock and large program registers for every waveform. It harvests energy, detects intervals, sets amplitude, width, interphase gap, and shorting duration, then drives current through the electrodes. During stimulation, a modulation switch changes the impedance across the piezo. The reflected ultrasound changes, and the external transceiver reads a 1-bit state report. The strongest program director question for this whole mechanism is simple. Where is the hard part hidden? The answer is that it is not hidden. In MindEye, the hard part is mapping scarce subject-specific fMRI data into a pre-trained multimodal space without collapsing retrieval or reconstruction. In brain captioning, the hard part is making text flexible enough to help reconstruction without letting caption errors propagate. In dream diffusion, the hard part is extracting robust semantics from noisy, low spatial resolution EEG. In neurodust, the hard part is powering, communicating with, and maintaining tiny chronic nodes while preserving signal to noise. In StimDust, the hard part is precise stimulation under safe acoustic power, with a wireless link stable enough to be clinically meaningful. That is the full stack. Biology becomes signal. Signal becomes embedding. Embedding becomes caption, retrieval, or image. Ultrasound becomes power. Power becomes stimulation. Backscatter becomes confirmation. No single paper solves the entire stack, and a serious claim must never pretend otherwise. But together the papers show that the stack has begun to close.
The evidence must be read like a program director reads it, with respect and with a knife. Start with dream diffusion. For EEG representation pre-training, the authors collected approximately 120,000 EEG data samples from over 400 subjects on the MOABB platform, with channel counts ranging from 30 to 128. They padded all data to 128 channels. Every 4 adjacent time steps became a token. Each token was projected to a 1024-dimensional embedding, and the model reconstructed mass signal patches. That is the scale behind the encoder before the paired image task begins. For paired EEG image experiments, Dream Diffusion used the ImageNet EEG dataset. 6 subjects viewed 2,000 images across 40 object categories, with 50 images per category. Each image was shown for half a second, with a 10-second pause after every 50 images. EEG was recorded with a 128-channel brain vision system, producing 12,128-channel EEG sequences. The paper used Stable Diffusion version 1.5, a 75% EEG mask ratio, filtering from 5 to 95 Hz, a common length of 512, 500 epochs of encoder pre-training, and another 300 epochs of fine-tuning. The reported results were generated using data from Subject 4. The ablation table is the heart of the evidence. The full Dream Diffusion model, with mass signal pre-training and CLIP fine-tuning at a mass ratio of 0.75, with encoder and cross-attention fine-tuned and 297 million parameters, reached 45.8% accuracy on the 50-way top 1 classification evaluation. The version without mass signal pre-training and without CLIP fine-tuning fell to 4.2% with the same parameter count. A smaller shallow model without both fell to 3.7%. Without mass pre-training but with CLIP fine-tuning, the large model reached 32.3% and the shallow model reached 24.5%. That table says something precise. CLIP supervision helps, but it does not replace EEG representation pre-training. Mask ratio also matters. With CLIP fine-tuning and a large model, a mask ratio of 0.25 reached 19.7%, 0.5 reached 38.3%, 0.75 reached 45.8%, and 0.85 reached 33.4%. The evidence supports the claim that temporal mass signal modeling at a high but not extreme ratio is central to the result. Now, brain captioning. The authors used the Natural Scenes dataset, an fMRI dataset of 8 subjects viewing COCO images, and focused on 2 subjects. For each subject, the work used 8,859 training images and 24,980 fMRI trials, plus 982 test images and 2,770 test trials. Repeated test trials were averaged to increase signal to noise. The fMRI signal was masked to roughly 15,000 voxels using the NSD General Region of Interest mask. The regressions used a regularization parameter of 50,000 after cross-validation. For text metrics, brain captioning reports that its image captions compared with human captions reached a meteor score of 0.404 for both tested subjects. Brain captions compared with image captions reached meteor scores of 0.305 and 0.298. Sentence transformer similarity for brain captions compared with image captions was 0.447 and 0.418. CLIP similarity for brain captions compared with image captions was 0.705 and 0.688. The baseline values were lower across the corresponding comparisons. For image reconstruction, brain captioning reports a pixel correlation of 0.353 and structural similarity of 0.327. Its two-way metrics were 0.89 for AlexNet Layer 2, 0.97 for AlexNet Layer 5, 0.84 for Inception, and 0.90 for CLIP. Compared with the cited prior works in the table, the method improved low-level metrics such as pixel correlation and structural similarity, while high-level metrics were slightly lower than the strongest state of the art in that comparison. The paper names a plausible reason. If the decoded text contains an error, the separate image reconstruction pipeline can propagate or amplify it. MindEye provides the strongest retrieval evidence. The model used the natural scenes dataset with subject-specific models for 4 participants. It averaged across 3 same image repetitions for the test set, leaving 982 test samples, but not the training set, leaving 24,980 training samples. For Subject 1, the figure reports exact top 1 image retrieval from the 982 image test set at 93.2% accuracy, while random chance was 0.1%. This matters because the test set contains visually similar candidates. The model is not merely saying zebra. It can often find which zebra. MindEye's table reports average reconstruction and retrieval metrics across the same 4 participants. Pixel correlation is 0.309. Structural similarity is 0.323. Two-way identification is 94.7% for AlexNet Layer 2, 97.8% for AlexNet Layer 5, 93.8% for Inception, and 94.1% for CLIP. Image retrieval is 93.6%, and brain retrieval is 90.1% out of 300 candidates, where chance is 0.3%. The high-level only pathway preserves high semantic metrics. The low-level only pathway improves pixel correlation to 0.360 and structural similarity to 0.479, but its high-level metrics fall sharply. That supports the paper's split between semantic and perceptual pathways. MindEye's ablations add another important point. A deep residual multi-layer perceptron backbone with 940 million parameters did not merely overfit the low sample setting, it helped. A 4 residual block model with the full hidden layer target reached higher retrieval performance than a much smaller model using only the class token. The paper argues that fMRI voxels contain fine-grained image-specific information, enough to predict all 257 CLIP image embeddings rather than only a summary token. That is an unusually strong claim, and the retrieval evidence is the reason it deserves attention. Neural dust is not an experimental human implant paper. Its evidence is a system scaling and link budget argument. For a 100 micrometer sensing node embedded 2 millimeters into brain tissue, ultrasonic power transmission can enable 7% efficiency power links, corresponding to negative 11.6 decibels, yielding roughly 500 microwatts receive power with a 1 square millimeter interrogator. The same scale electromagnetic transmission is estimated at roughly 40 picowatts. The paper states the ultrasound result is more than 10 to the 7th times greater than electromagnetic transmission at similar scale. The paper also shows why ultrasound scales differently. 10 megahertz ultrasound in brain tissue has a wavelength of 150 micrometers, while 10 gigahertz electromagnetic radiation has a wavelength of 5 millimeters. Electromagnetic power transfer at the tiny node scale is punished by antenna inefficiency, tissue loss, and mutual coupling collapse. Ultrasound using mechanical pressure waves can operate with shorter wavelengths in tissue and lower attenuation in the relevant regime. The paper estimates that a dust node as small as 20 micrometers could recover about 3.5 microwatts under its assumptions, but its signal-to-noise analysis suggests operation down to about 50 micrometers for an input signal-to-noise ratio of 3. StimDust supplies the experimental stimulation evidence. The system is a 1.7 cubic millimeter wireless, batteryless, lidless implantable stimulator with ultrasonic power and bidirectional communication. It includes a piezo ceramic transducer, storage capacitor, and custom stimulation integrated circuit. The authors report that it operates at an acoustic intensity equal to 7.8% of the FDA limit for diagnostic ultrasound. The minimum acoustic intensity necessary for operation at optimal mote angle was 56 milliwatts per square centimeter, compared with the diagnostic ultrasound safety limit of 720 milliwatts per square centimeter. The stimulation parameters are specific. The integrated circuit decoded current amplitude from 50 microamperes to 400 microamperes with 3-bit resolution, pulse width with 450 nanosecond resolution, interphase gap with 450 nanosecond resolution, electrode shorting with 450 nanosecond resolution, and pulse repetition frequency from 0 to 5 kilohertz with 450 nanosecond resolution. In a gel tissue phantom, the system achieved stimulation power of 89 microwatts, 2,380 hertz pulse repetition while delivering 400 microamperes for 80 microseconds, and 5.05 kilohertz at 50 microamperes with 80 microsecond pulse width. The absolute maximum pulse repetition frequency was 16 kilohertz before voltage droop and compliance limits dominated. The link evidence is unusually concrete. In vitro, the backscatter uplink had an actual bit error rate of 0 out of 878. Ex vivo, the mote operated wirelessly at 55 millimeters depth through fresh porcine hind limb tissue, including skin, fat, muscle, connective tissue, and gel. It delivers stimulation up to 400 microamperes and 1500 microseconds. In vivo, fully implanted motes operated through skin and muscle layers in anesthetized rats. The through-tissue backscatter uplink had an actual bit error rate of 0 out of 222 from 111 pulses, with a Gaussian fit estimated bit error rate of 1.5 times 10 to the negative 7th. The evoked compound muscle action potential follows stimulation after roughly 1.5 milliseconds, matching a conduction velocity of roughly 25 meters per second over about 30 millimeters. The biological control evidence matters because it separates a powered gadget from a stimulator. Varying current from 50 microamperes to 400 microamperes with fixed pulse width produced a recruitment curve with activation between 200 and 250 microamperes and saturation between 350 and 400 microamperes. Varying pulse width at fixed 400 microamperes showed an elicitation threshold around 26 microseconds and saturation around 150 microseconds. These are not aesthetic outputs. They are controlled physiological responses. The boundary of the evidence is equally important. DreamDiffusion's strongest results are within subject, and the paper reports all results from subject 4. Brain captioning used 2 subjects in high-quality fMRI data. MindEye is subject-specific, and the participants spent up to 40 hours in the scanner. NeuralDust is a scaling proposal, not a finished chronic clinical system. StimDust is acute rat sciatic nerve stimulation, not chronic human therapy. None of that weakens the papers if the claims stay inside those boundaries. It only becomes a problem when a speaker calls the collection mind reading without naming the laboratory cage around the result. The prior art begins with the oldest trick in neural decoding: map brain activity into features a machine already knows how to use. Early fMRI decoding work showed that spatial position, orientation, and broad categories could be decoded from visual cortex activity. Later systems mapped fMRI to features from convolutional neural networks, variational autoencoders, generative adversarial networks, Big N, and other generative frameworks. These works made the central move before the current generation did. Do not generate from brain activity alone. Use the brain activity to predict a representation inside a model trained elsewhere. For image reconstruction from fMRI, the named neighbors in these papers include Takagi and Nishimoto, who use latent diffusion models with fMRI signals and map to components of stable diffusion. Ozcelik and Van Rullen's brain diffuser use natural scene reconstruction from fMRI signals with generative latent diffusion, combining low and high-level components. Gu and colleagues worked with fMRI reconstruction using surface-based convolutional approaches and generative models. Lin and colleagues mapped brain activity to CLIP-related spaces and used a generative model for reconstruction. MindViz and MindVideo pursued mass brain modeling and reconstruction of images or video. The field did not begin with MindEye, and MindEye does not pretend it did. MindEye's prior art section is valuable because it names the structural differences. Lin and colleagues used a convolutional model, InfoNCE loss, a fine-tuned generative adversarial model, and no diffusion prior. Ozcelik and Van Rullen used ridge regression to map to CLIP space and VDVAE features, without contrastive learning or a diffusion prior. Takagi and Nishimoto used ridge regression to map to stable diffusion latents and CLIP text latents. MindViz attacked a related problem by pre-training a mass brain model. The pattern is clear. Everyone is trying to reach a pre-trained representational space. The competition is over which bridge is accurate, data efficient, and useful for both retrieval and reconstruction. For brain captioning, the prior art is thinner but still present. Earlier work attempted captions from brain activity using convolutional networks and recurrent decoders. Brain captioning's claim rests on shifting the center from direct image estimation to text, and on using a transformer-based captioning model whose outputs can condition later generative systems. The authors compare against a baseline architecture based on a convolutional neural network, followed by a long short-term memory model. The gain is not that nobody thought language mattered. The gain is that a stronger vision language model and a modular reconstruction pipeline make captioning a more flexible interface layer. For EEG to image, DreamDiffusion's named prior art includes Brain2Image and ThoughtViz. Brain2Image used long short-term memory and generative methods to learn compact EEG representations for generating visual stimuli. ThoughtViz used encoded EEG signals to generate corresponding images, even under limited training data. Other work used EEG as a supervision signal for semantic feature learning. DreamDiffusion also places itself against fMRI systems like MindEye, which can reconstruct higher quality images but rely on equipment that is expensive, non-portable, and professionally operated. The prior art therefore divides by signal source. fMRI gives stronger spatial information. EEG gives the portability dream and the noise penalty. The hardware prior art has its own map. Neural recording systems have long depended on tethered electrodes, hubs, and relatively limited channel counts. Chronic implants face tissue response over months, upper bounds on practical recording sites, and infection risk from wires crossing skin or skull. Electromagnetic wireless power transfer is mature in many medical devices, including cochlear implants, but NeuralDust argues that tiny implant scale inside tissue changes the comparison. The problem is not whether electromagnetic power can ever work. The problem is whether it scales to tens of micrometers at useful depth with enough received power for low-noise neural recording. StimDust prior art includes clinical neural stimulators, cochlear implants, deep brain stimulation systems, passive wireless stimulators, RF powered devices, inductive links, and earlier ultrasound-powered implants. The paper's comparison table names prior systems across ultrasound, radio frequency, and coil inductive links. Several systems can stimulate. Some are deeper, some are larger, some lack uplink, some rely on voltage mode stimulation where output depends on received power and electrode impedance. Some require larger volume, batteries, or leads. StimDust places its novelty in the combination: small volume, current-controlled output, ultrasonic power and communication, dynamic waveform configuration by envelope timing, and a backscatter uplink state bit. A skeptical program director will also know the conceptual prior art, the field's habit of overclaiming. Every mind-reading headline makes the next serious proposal harder to defend. The director will ask whether these systems decode thoughts or decode scene stimuli. The right answer is seen stimuli under known experimental conditions, with possible future extensions to imagery, but not a general mind reader. The director will ask whether pre-trained models are hallucinating plausible images from weak brain signals. The right answer is that generative priors contribute heavily, which is why retrieval metrics and control comparisons matter. A reconstruction image can flatter the system. Retrieval is harder to fake. The director will ask whether subject-specific calibration makes the method scientifically impressive but practically brittle. The answer is yes, for now. Brain captioning names subject-specific models and the need for common spaces across subjects. MindEye states that current models are not across subject decoders and that non-invasive methods require compliance. DreamDiffusion confronts individual differences in EEG and uses pre-training across diverse EEG data to improve robustness, but its reported image results remain within subject. The prior art is therefore not only earlier papers, it is the unsolved problem of generalization. The director will ask about ethics because the word mind is radioactive. Brain captioning explicitly raises misuse, misleading content, harmful content, bias, privacy, and the fact that decoded activity is related to mental and internal states. MindEye says brain data must be carefully protected, and companies collecting such data should be transparent. These are not ornamental paragraphs, they are prior art in governance form. A technology that reconstructs perception will be judged not only by accuracy, but by consent, scope, security, and the difference between perception under cooperation and unauthorized inference. So the honest prior art map is not a graveyard the new work triumphs over. It is a scaffold. fMRI, reconstruction learned to exploit generative models. Captioning learned to exploit language. EEG generation learned to exploit temporal pre-training and CLIP supervision. Ultrasonic implants learned to exploit acoustic scaling and backscatter. The uploaded papers stand on that scaffold and make specific structural moves. The applicant who hides the scaffold looks naive. The applicant who names it, then names the structural gap, sounds ready. The prior art also includes the clinical world's tolerance for ugly hardware when the therapy is valuable. Deep brain stimulation systems, cochlear implants, and responsive neurostimulation devices change lives despite bulk, leads, surgical complexity, and periodic management. A small wireless stimulator is not competing against nothing. It is competing against devices with clinical history, reimbursement pathways, surgeon familiarity, and known failure modes. StimDust therefore cannot win by being small alone. It has to show that smallness brings access, reduced lead burden, placement at target, and programmable control without sacrificing safety. For decoding, the prior art includes the public model itself. CLIP, stable diffusion, versatile diffusion, GIT, control net, VDVAE are not neutral utilities. They are trained systems with biases, strengths, and blind spots. A brain decoder that routes through those models inherits some of their worldview. If the generator knows common images better than rare clinical or cultural scenes, the output may drift toward the familiar. That means prior art is not only earlier neuroscience, it is the machine learning substrate that shapes what can be reconstructed. There is one more predecessor, and it is the press release. The press release is dangerous because it turns constrained evidence into public myth. A program director has seen this cycle. A paper reconstructs viewed images. A headline says scientists can read thoughts. A grant proposal then arrives using the same inflated language, and the reviewer becomes hostile before the mechanism is heard. The applicant must separate themselves from the headline by speaking with colder precision than the article that celebrated the field. Differentiation is where weak proposals go to die. A weak answer says the system is more accurate, more portable, more advanced, or more innovative. A program director hears adjectives and waits for structure. Structure means the difference would remain even if another lab copied the surface language. Structure means the architecture changed the bottleneck. For brain captioning, the structural difference is the decision to make language the flexible intermediate output rather than treating the reconstructed image as the only prize. Captions are lower bandwidth than images, but they are semantically powerful and portable across future generative models. The image reconstruction pipeline then uses initial guesses and depth estimates to compensate for what text leaves out. The novelty claim is not that captions are prettier than images. It is that text creates a modular interface between brain decoding and generative reconstruction. For MindEye, the structural difference is the separation of retrieval and reconstruction through specialized submodules. A contrastive objective is excellent for finding the matching image among candidates. A diffusion prior is better for producing generator-ready embeddings. The low-level pathway supplies perceptual structure that the high-level CLIP pathway tends to lose. The result is a system built around the idea that no single latent output should be forced to serve every purpose. Retrieval, semantic reconstruction, and perceptual reconstruction are related tasks, but they do not have identical geometry. For DreamDiffusion, the structural difference is the treatment of EEG as a temporal signal that must first learn itself before it is asked to condition an image generator. Temporal mass signal modeling creates an EEG encoder with broader contextual competence. CLIP image supervision then aligns the EEG representation with the image language that Stable Diffusion can use. The novelty is not EEG to image alone. Earlier works tried that. The novelty is the three-part stack: temporal EEG pre-training, Stable Diffusion conditioning, and CLIP guided alignment under scarce paired data. For neural dust, the structural difference is the physical layer. The paper does not merely shrink an electrode. It changes the carrier from electromagnetic coupling to ultrasound and distributes the interface into tiny free-floating nodes with a subcranial interrogator. That changes the scaling law that matters most. The electromagnetic system becomes punished as the node shrinks. The ultrasonic system remains plausible because a micrometer-scale piezoelectric transducer can couple to a short acoustic wavelength in tissue. The difference is not incremental miniaturization. It is a change in energy and communication modality. For StimDust, the structural difference is the integration of safe ultrasonic power, dynamic timing-based command encoding, current-controlled stimulation, and backscatter state reporting in a 1.7 cubic millimeter mote. Passive devices can be small, but their output can depend on receive power and electrode impedance. Larger active stimulators can be precise, but they carry volume, leads, batteries, or more complicated telemetry. StimDust pushes complexity outward into the handheld transceiver and keeps the mote small and power efficient. That is a structural allocation of intelligence. The body-resident device stays minimal. The external controller does the heavy work. Now the synthesis. The 5 papers together do not yet create a full commercial mind-reading product. They create the outline of a research platform category. The category is brain representation interfaces, systems that map neural activity into multimodal latent spaces for decoding, and use ultrasonic microdevices as a future physical layer for closed-loop interaction with nervous tissue. One side reads perception into images and language. The other side writes controlled stimulation into nerves through small wireless motes. The bridge between them is representation plus feedback. A one-breath differentiation sentence for the whole stack would be this. This differs from prior brain decoding and implant work because it treats neural activity as a noisy key into pre-trained multimodal latent space while treating ultrasound as the body-compatible physical layer for small, wireless, closed-loop neural interfaces. That sentence is not hype. Every clause names a structural choice. Neural activity is noisy. Multimodal latent space supplies the representational target. Ultrasound supplies the power and communication layer. Small wireless closed-loop interfaces name the translational direction. A program director may push harder. Is this one project or 5 adjacent papers placed in a dramatic row? The answer must concede the gap. It is not one completed system. It is a defensible convergence thesis. The decoding papers do not require neural dust to function. StimDust does not decode images, but an NSF-style concept can be built at the intersection only if the mechanism linking them is specific. The mechanism is that future BCI systems need both representational decoding and a scalable tissue interface.
Without decoding, implants become output devices without rich interpretation. Without the physical layer, decoders remain trapped in scanner rooms and lab rigs. The strongest commercial output is not a consumer telepathy headset. That would be the generic and weak answer. The stronger output is a translational platform for calibrated visual and neural communication under consent. First for research, rehabilitation, locked-in communication, neurofeedback, and neural art. Later for closed-loop stimulation, where decoded intent or perceptual state shapes output. The product category would sit between neurotechnology, generative artificial intelligence, and implantable bioelectronics. Its first buyers would not be the mass public. They would be labs, clinics, and therapeutic device developers who already understand calibration, safety, and consent. This is why the differentiation must be adversarial. The field does not need another claim that machines can read thoughts. It needs a precise claim that can survive subtraction. Remove the hype, and what remains? Subject-specific mapping from brain activity into latent spaces. Retrieval metrics that show fine-grained signal. Generative reconstructions guided by semantic and perceptual pathways. EEG pre-training that moves toward portability while respecting noise. Ultrasonic implants that show power, communication, and stimulation at scales where electromagnetic links struggle. That remainder is strong enough to build on. A second one-breath sentence, narrower and more technical, would be this. The technical difference is a modular translation stack that separates semantic retrieval, generative reconstruction, low-level perceptual recovery, and ultrasonic body communication instead of forcing one model or one wireless link to solve every layer. This sentence helps when the director asks why the pieces belong together. They belong together because each piece owns a different failure mode. A single monolithic claim would blur those failures. A modular stack can measure them separately. The strongest differentiation against generic brain-computer interface work is that these papers are representation first. Many BCI systems decode a small command set: left, right, select, move, grip, speak a letter. Those are powerful, especially clinically. The uploaded decoding papers aim at richer visual representation, captions, images, instances, and latent spaces. That does not make them clinically superior. It makes their research question different. They ask whether high-dimensional perceptual content can be mapped into a machine's image language. The strongest differentiation against generic generative artificial intelligence is that the prompt is biological. A text-to-image model begins with words. A brain decoder begins with measured neural activity and uses words or image embeddings as intermediate forms. The public model supplies prior knowledge, but the conditioning signal comes from a person's perceptual state under measurement. This is why evaluation cannot be the same as ordinary image generation. Beauty is irrelevant. Correspondence is the standard. The strongest differentiation against generic implantable stimulation is feedback and scale. StimDust does not only receive power and stimulate, it reports stimulation state through backscatter. Neural dust is not only a smaller electrode, it proposes a scalable architecture for many tiny nodes. A future interface that reads and writes must know whether its write occurred. Without that return path, closed loop becomes theater. The differentiation that survives is therefore sober. Richer representation on the decoding side, smaller and safer physical access on the hardware side, and a modular architecture that allows each layer to be tested against its own prior art. That is not a product claim. It is a research program with teeth. For an applicant, this is the difference between a pitch and a performance. A performance says the work is unlike anything before it. A pitch says exactly which bottleneck moved. Here the move bottlenecks are visible. The decoding bottleneck moves from direct image synthesis to latent alignment. The EEG bottleneck moves from scarce paired data to broad temporal pre-training. The implant bottleneck moves from radio scaling to acoustic coupling. The stimulation bottleneck moves from bulky programmable hardware to a tiny mode controlled by an external timing protocol. That is the language that survives.
The program director begins with the question that removes the mask. Are you decoding thoughts, or are you reconstructing stimuli from cooperative subjects under constrained experimental conditions? The answer should be direct. The current evidence supports reconstruction and retrieval of perceived stimuli, not unrestricted thought reading. Brain captioning, MindEye, and DreamDiffusion work with subjects viewing images from known datasets or controlled image categories. MindEye's strongest retrieval result is exact image retrieval from a test set for a calibrated subject, not an unauthorized scan of private imagination. The defensible claim is calibrated neural representation decoding. That boundary is not weakness. It is the condition that makes the work scientific. Then the director asks the question that kills most translational fantasies. How does this generalize across people? The answer should concede the limit before the director has to drag it out. Current performance is largely subject-specific. Brain captioning trained and evaluated on 2 subjects from the natural scenes dataset. MindEye trains subject-specific models for 4 participants and notes that current models are not capable of across subject decoding. DreamDiffusion reports results from subject 4 after training and testing on the same subject. The path forward is not to pretend one universal decoder already exists. The path is to learn shared functional spaces, improve transfer learning, and use pre-training across diverse brain data the way DreamDiffusion uses large-scale EEG pre-training to reduce dependence on scarce paired trials. The director keeps going. If the best fMRI results require up to 40 hours in a scanner, where is the practical system? The answer is that fMRI is the proving ground for representation, not the final form factor for broad use. It gives high-quality brain data that can reveal whether visual information is recoverable at all and what latent spaces are useful. Brain captioning explicitly points toward portable modalities such as functional near-infrared spectroscopy as future work. DreamDiffusion takes the more portable EEG route now, accepting noise and lower spatial resolution as the cost of that move. A realistic roadmap separates laboratory representation discovery from eventual portable or implantable interfaces. The director's next question is blunt. Aren't the diffusion models hallucinating? The answer is yes, in the limited technical sense that generative priors fill in missing detail, and no in the stronger dismissive sense if retrieval and metrics show stimulus-specific information. Reconstructions alone can mislead because a generator can produce a plausible dog from weak evidence. That is why MindEye's retrieval results matter. Exact top 1 retrieval from 982 test images at 93.2% for subject 1 is a harder signal than a pretty reconstruction. Brain captioning's errors also reveal the limit. A wrong word in the caption can propagate into the image pipeline. The correct defense is that generative priors are part of the method, not proof of mind access by themselves. Now the director turns to EEG. Why believe EEG can support image generation when it is noisy and spatially weak? The answer should point to the specific mechanism and the specific boundary. DreamDiffusion does not claim raw EEG is enough. It uses temporal mass signal modeling on approximately 120,000 EEG samples from over 400 subjects, then fine-tunes with paired EEG image data and aligns EEG features to CLIP image embeddings. The ablation evidence shows the full model at 45.8% on the 50-weight top 1 evaluation, while removing both mass pre-training and CLIP fine-tuning drops performance near chance-like levels. That supports the mechanism, but it remains early within subject and far from general visual mind reading. Then comes hardware. Why ultrasound? Why not radio frequency, inductive links, or conventional implants? The answer should name the scaling law. At tiny implant scales in tissue, electromagnetic power transfer suffers from antenna and mutual coupling limits plus tissue absorption. NeuralDust estimates that a 100 micrometer node 2 millimeters into brain tissue could receive roughly 500 microwatts from ultrasonic transmission with a 1 square millimeter interrogator, compared with roughly 40 picowatts for electromagnetic transmission at similar scale.
ultrasound shorter wavelength in tissue and lower attenuation in the relevant regime make small piezoelectric nodes plausible. The caveat is that this is a system analysis, not a finished chronic human implant. The director points to StimDust. Acute rat sciatic nerve stimulation is not a chronic human therapy. Why should anyone care? The answer is that StimDust demonstrates a set of engineering properties that chronic systems will need, even though it does not prove chronic safety. It is 1.7 cubic millimeters, batteryless, leadless, ultrasonically powered, and current controlled. It operates at 7.8% of the diagnostic ultrasound intensity limit. It showed 0 out of 878 bit errors in vitro and 0 out of 222 through tissue in vivo under the reported conditions. It controlled physiological response by varying current impulse width. The limitation is duration, species, target, and chronic packaging. The achievement is precise wireless stimulation at a scale where conventional architectures become awkward. The director asked the ethical question last, because that is where the grant can become socially radioactive. What prevents misuse? The answer must not sound naive. Current non-invasive systems require cooperation, calibration, and controlled conditions. A subject can degrade decoding by moving or thinking about unrelated material. That does not eliminate privacy risk. It defines the present risk boundary. Brain data should be treated as sensitive, consent-bound, and purpose-limited. Generated output should not be represented as literal thoughts. Bias in pre-trained models can enter outputs. A system that decodes perception through CLIP and diffusion inherits part of the public model's learned world, not only the subject's neural state. The final director question is the NSF question underneath all the others. What is the fundable unknown? The answer is not that mind reading is exciting. The fundable unknown is whether neural signals from different modalities and subjects can be mapped into shared multimodal latent spaces with enough fidelity for retrieval, communication, and closed-loop control, while future ultrasonic interfaces supply safe, small, wireless access to nervous tissue. The experiment should therefore test transfer across subjects, robustness across sessions, comparisons between fMRI, EEG, and other portable signals, retrieval versus reconstruction trade-offs, and closed-loop safety metrics. If stimulation enters the system, the model answer for the applicant is calm. Do not overclaim. Do not surrender the core. Say, the present evidence proves calibrated decoding of perceived visual content, not general thought extraction. It shows that pre-trained multimodal latent spaces can amplify scarce brain data into useful captions, retrievals, and reconstructions. And it shows that ultrasound can power and communicate with miniature neural devices at scales where electromagnetic approaches face harsh limits. The project is to unify those lessons into a consent-based brain representation interface, then measure where it breaks. That last phrase matters. Measure where it breaks. A proposal becomes strong when it stops treating limitations as public relations hazards and turns them into experiments. Cross-subject failure becomes an alignment aim. EEG noise becomes a pre-training aim. Caption error. Propagation becomes a modular control aim. Acoustic misalignment becomes a link robustness aim. Chronic tissue response becomes a packaging and materials aim. A program director can attack romance forever. It is harder to attack a builder who has already turned every weakness into a name test. If the director asks for the first experiment to fund, choose the one that attacks the weakest link. Do not choose the prettiest reconstruction. Choose cross-session and cross-subject robustness. Train on one session, test on another. Train with fewer repetitions, test degradation. Compare retrieval and reconstruction under the same subject, same image set, same latent target. For EEG, test whether temporal mass pre-training improves transfer to subjects and categories not seen in paired training. For ultrasound hardware, test link robustness under motion, depth variation, angular offset, and tissue heterogeneity before claiming clinical readiness. If the director asks what success looks like after an early award, avoid the word revolution. Say success is a calibrated demonstration that names its boundary. For decoding, success is improved retrieval and reconstruction under reduced subject-specific training, with explicit failure analysis when the model confuses semantically close images. For hardware, success is safe operation under defined acoustic limits, reliable uplink state reporting, and controlled physiological output in a model appropriate to the target. For ethics, success is a consent and data governance plan that treats brain recordings as sensitive from the beginning.
So return to the first question. If a machine can draw what a person has seen, has it entered the mind? No. It has entered a disciplined bargain with the body. The subject consents to a task. The instrument records a proxy. The model learns a mapping. The pre-trained generator supplies a world of visual priors. The output is neither pure invention nor pure extraction. It is a negotiated artifact between brain, machine, dataset, and model. That answer is less theatrical than the headline, but it is deeper. The mind remains more than the measurable trace because seeing is not only activation. It is attention, meaning, memory, fear, desire, fatigue, and context. Yet the measurable trace is not trivial. When MindEye retrieves the exact image from a crowded candidate set, something fine-grained has crossed the boundary. When brain captioning turns fMRI activity into a usable sentence, semantic structure has crossed. When DreamDiffusion turns EEG into images through mass temporal pre-training and CLIP alignment, portability begins to press against the old scanner wall. When neural dust and StimDust show ultrasound as a physical layer for tiny neural devices, the interface begins to leave the room. The ancient dream was total legibility. The scientific answer is partial legibility under conditions. That partiality is not failure. It is the form in which serious knowledge arrives. The moon seen through Galileo's telescope was not the whole moon. It was enough to end a cosmology. A reconstructed zebra from fMRI is not the subject's full experience of the zebra. It may be enough to change what communication, art, and neurotechnology can become. Simone Weil's attention still matters here. These systems work best when the subject cooperates, attends, and stays still enough for the instrument to read the trace. The technology does not abolish consent in its current form. It depends on consent as signal quality. But that dependence should not make the field complacent. Better sensors, better models, and better priors can move boundaries. The ethical frame must move before the most dangerous use case arrives, not after. The practical future will not arrive as a single mind-reading machine. It will arrive as components. A research lab will use fMRI decoders to understand visual representation. A clinic may test communication pathways for patients who cannot speak. An artist may shape neural art from attention and imagery. A bioelectronic device company may use ultrasonic motes for precise stimulation without bulky leads. A future closed-loop system may read a state, decide an intervention, stimulate tissue, and verify the pulse through backscatter. The myth is one machine. The reality is an ecosystem. That ecosystem will be judged by its weakest claims. If it sells telepathy, it will deserve distrust. If it says what it can measure, under what conditions, against what baselines, with what failures, it can mature. The beauty of the uploaded papers is that their strongest moments are not the generated images. Their strongest moments are the places where architecture meets evidence. The ablation that makes EEG pre-training undeniable, the retrieval metric that makes fMRI embeddings more than decoration, the backscatter bit error rate that makes a tiny stimulator accountable, the ultrasound link budget that explains why sound can beat radio at a scale where radio becomes nearly invisible. The answer to Blumenberg's legibility question is therefore double. The world became legible to science by being measured through instruments. The mind becomes legible only in pieces, by letting instruments catch the body's response to world, image, and intention. But the unreadable remainder is not a mystical escape hatch. It is the territory that keeps the science honest. Every decoder stands at the edge of that remainder and must name the edge. A serious applicant leaves this material with a different posture, not dazzled, armed. They can say what DreamDiffusion does, why mass temporal EEG pre-training matters, and why CLIP supervision is not decorative. They can say why brain captioning uses text, initial images, and depth rather than image generation alone. They can say why MindEye separates retrieval from reconstruction, why a diffusion prior matters, and why retrieval is the harder evidence. They can say why neural dust changes the carrier physics, and why StimDust proves a small wireless current-controlled stimulator can work acutely through tissue. They can say what remains unsolved without flinching, and the general listener leaves with the romance corrected, not destroyed. There is wonder here. It is not the wonder of a sorcerer stealing thoughts. It is the wonder of a machine learning to hear, in blood and voltage and echo, the faint address of an image. The mind has not become glass. It has become partially addressable. That is enough to change the century if the people building it remember that an address is not ownership. The last line should be simple. The machine does not read the soul. It learns where the shadow of seeing falls. The most important return is not emotional. It is grammatical. Stop saying the machine read a mind. Say what happened. It decoded fMRI activity into a caption. It retrieved the matching image from candidates. It generated a reconstruction from a brain-derived CLIP embedding. It used EEG to condition a diffusion model after temporal mass pre-training. It powered a stimulator by ultrasound. It received a backscatter state bit. The grammar disciplines the imagination. A disciplined imagination can build. The future ethical line may be this. The more fluent the interface becomes, the more carefully society must distinguish access from authority. Access to a neural signal does not give authority over the meaning of a person's inner life. A model output is an artifact of a system. It may help communication. It may reveal perceptual structure. It may guide therapy. It may also mislead if treated as a verdict. The person remains the final witness to meaning, even when the machine becomes a powerful witness to signal. This is why the field needs both ambition and refusal. Ambition to build better shared spaces, better portable sensing, better ultrasonic links, better closed-loop systems. Refusal to inflate a reconstruction into a soul report. Refusal to call a laboratory stimulus a private thought. Refusal to hide the dependence on pre-trained models. Refusal to treat consent as a checkbox after the architecture is done. The closing image should be exact, not a crystal ball, not a divine eye, a sensor, a model, and a body in relation. Blood changes, voltage flickers, sound moves through tissue, a vector shifts in latent space, a generator paints what the system can infer, a tiny mote answers with a changed echo. The mystery has not vanished. It has acquired interfaces, and that may be the real threshold. Humanity once built instruments to read the stars, then cells, then genes, then networks. Each instrument changed what people believed the hidden world to be. These tools now begin to read the trace of seeing itself. They do not end inwardness. They make inwardness experimentally negotiable. A civilization that can negotiate with the trace of thought has crossed a line, even if it has not crossed the final one. The final humility is that every output remains revisable. A better scanner changes the trace. A better captioning model changes the sentence. A better diffusion model changes the image. A better shared subject space changes generalization. A better piezoelectric material changes the implant. A better acoustic lens changes alignment tolerance. This field will not mature by finding one final decoder. It will mature by making each layer replaceable without losing the discipline of measurement. That is also the reason the research belongs in a lecture rather than a headline. The headline freezes the image and says, look, the machine saw a thought. The lecture keeps the machinery moving. It shows the prior, the bridge, the metric, the limit, the attack, and the answer. By the end, wonder is still present, but it has been trained. Trained wonder is harder to fool. The unreadable remainder will remain. It should. A person is not the sum of recoverable stimulus features, but the recoverable features are enough to build communication, art, therapy, and danger. The right stance is neither panic nor worship. It is custodianship. Build the interface. Measure it without mercy. Govern the data. Protect the person. Never confuse the shadow of seeing with the one who sees.